Now, to the point they were so starved that they were trying to eat each other, like literal cannibals. They were fed food specific to a particular calorie, and they were stuck in a room for 24 hours a day for weeks. So then why do you think that you've hit starvation mode if someone in a ward with controlled calories is not doing the same thing? Hi, I'm Nathan. I work with the South Asian community and worked with 3,000 South Asians in the last 7 years, and we're here to build the healthiest generation of South Asians ever. So there's a snippet of truth in starvation mode when it comes to adaptive thermogenesis. So I want to explain the facts, the science, and the fiction, and where you're getting stuck. So adaptive thermogenesis is where your body weight decreases and the needs and the demands of your calories also decrease. As you get more into a further calorie deficit, maybe it's more aggressive, you're getting more tired, you actually then adapt your activity levels. You stand up less, you sit down more, you don't do as many steps, you don't move as much, you don't fidget as much. So your calorie burning actually decreases when you're on that low calorie deficit. A 220 pound person versus a 140 pound person will have completely different calorie needs. So if you go from 220 to 180, those needs will be different. If you go from 180 to 140, your needs will be different. After being London's best personal trainer and working with clients, what I saw was that adaptive thermogenesis was a steady drop off, a steady decline. So that meant that in the weeks 1 to 6, they'd lose a kilo a week. And then weeks 8 to 12, they would lose 0.6 a week. And then from 12 to 16 weeks, they would lose 0.4 a week. And you would see this like slowly stooping line of graph to the point where the levels that they would be losing would be very minimal in comparison to what they were losing maybe 6 to 12 weeks ago, which goes in line with as you're losing weight, you then burn less calories. So your deficit goes from here to 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 here until it becomes a very small deficit. Where it didn't make sense is where people would lose weight for 6 weeks and then all of a sudden for the next 3 weeks they would lose nothing. That is not starvation mode. That is not adaptive thermogenesis. And this is where the kicker sits in. Because when you look at the research on starvation mode, there is a study that is trying to prove that starvation mode doesn't exist, and it does a really good job. So it locks these people in this ward and makes them stay in this ward and starves them. Now, to the point they were so starved that they were trying to eat each other, like literal cannibals. None of them ever didn't lose weight. So in a controlled environment where they were never allowed a social event, they were never allowed to make their own meals, they were fed food specific to a particular calorie, and they were stuck in a room for 24 hours a day for weeks. They never stopped losing weight. And that's the most controlled environment, right? Where you're not got any variability. So in a world where there's no variability and there's no outside influences, people lose weight consistently. And adaptive thermogenesis becomes very, very little minor point compared to the actual results that someone's getting. So then it begs the question, so then why do you think that you've hit starvation mode if someone in a ward with controlled calories is not doing the same thing? And what this comes down to is what we call cognitive bias. So cognitive bias is looking at the emotional level of input that you have and presenting a picture to yourself of a reality that is not completely true. So we tend to forget things, we tend to be human, and we tend to ignore things that we don't think are that important that tend to be super important. Let me give you an example. In a car, we all know subconsciously that if the petrol goes too low, the car runs out of fuel. You don't really correlate that going to the petrol station is the key fundamental to keep that car running. And that's the same what's happening with you as being a South Asian who is trying to lose belly fat and calling it starvation mode when you see less results. Because you're focusing on the wrong things and the wrong level of details. We know from a clinical trial perspective where they are so tightly controlled that they don't stop losing weight, but you lose weight for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 weeks, and then you have this 2-week plateau where you don't lose anything, you have signs that you've done something right. That 2-week loss is perfect. Now the question is, in the 3rd and the 4th week, objectively, truthfully, measured and specifically, with no obligation to be wrong or right or guilt or shame, what did you do differently from week 3 and week 4 than you did in week 1 or week 2? Because there will be a difference. You just haven't found the reason why you think you're in starvation mode, which means why you've ate more calories than you should. Because unlike these people in these clinical trials, you are living life. You have to prep your own meals, you have to deal with sleepless nights with kids, you have to deal with takeaways, wedding events, going to the office and seeing your coffee and a croissant on the way there. You get exposed to all of these environments where they never got exposed to, which then means that you're more likely to not be as controlled or as specific as you need to be repetitively. Humans are terrible at adherence to consistency. and repeatability. We find it boring, annoying, we find it hard to do, we find concentration lacks, we find that our emotions change our decision making, and then we justify our decisions because of our emotions, and we go around in these cycles. So therefore we build up this bias of thinking, I've done everything I could, how I feel like I've done that, but I haven't really actually done that when I put down on paper. I have clients, even to this day, that have got amazing results in like an 8 to 12 week period, and then all of a sudden it flatlines. And they're like, Nathan, I'm so annoyed, it's not coming down. My first question, what are you doing differently than you did 4 weeks ago? Specifically, accurately measured, and without bias. Even if you don't think it's different. Oh, I might have done this. I might have had this on the Saturday because I was feeling bad, or I might have had a glass of wine on Friday because I finished the week. And before you know it, there's this laundry list of additional extras that have been added, or small details, like a death by 1,000 cuts, compared to the 2 weeks before. And when you add up those totals of those small amounts, you'll realize that that number of calories is not insignificant. And therefore, the difference between starvation mode or adaptive thermogenesis and you having adaptive thermogenesis is how well you followed the plan and the reality of that. Because the body is a wonderful thing. There is no real thing in this world that changes weight management. So you can have fucked up hormones, you can have low thyroid, you could have menopause, you could have PCOS, you can have low testosterone, you can have blooming arthritis, you can have pregnancy, you can have medication, and none of these stop fat loss. They just either make it harder, more difficult, more pressing emotionally to deal with, and they bring around a bunch of reasons why you shouldn't or couldn't or didn't do the things that you were supposed to do. And often people get wrapped up in labeling it something else as a problem as opposed to labeling ourselves as the problem. When I was struggling with binge eating and overeating and yo-yo dieting, I always knew I was the problem because I was educated enough to know that nutrition was the barrier to everybody's problems, and consistency and adherence to nutrition was everyone's problem in general. So I knew that early on. So I never blamed it on my hormones or my situation or my circumstances. I always had that ownership, as opposed to asking the question, what am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? Specifically, accurately measured, without guilt and judgment. Because once you go through that framework, you will find things over a long enough time frame where you've had 5 good days and 2 bad ones, and then before you know it, you've got a laundry list of things that you haven't done in the last 21 days, and those death by 1,000 cuts were the difference between you making progress and you blaming starvation mode. And it doesn't have to be that way, because all of this journey around you getting in shape, being South Asian, you have a lot of challenges. Everyone has challenges on their journey, but you particularly will have challenges along the way. And the more we give power to things like starvation mode, hormones, the more we actually don't learn the lessons of what it's like to get in shape, stay in shape, and completely transform our mindset, our physical health, and our mental health. Because you're responsible for you. Your hormones are not responsible for your eating habits. They might impact your eating habits by the way that they make you think or feel, but that doesn't correlate with you picking up the chocolate or picking up the spoon or picking up the portion, because that's still there is a gap between your circumstance and your ownership. And it's really important to not put starvation mode as the reason why you're not losing weight. And there's no case, nowhere in this world, no client that I've ever worked with who has had that moment where they've had 21 days and they've recalled those things that they've eaten, and there isn't 3, 10, 12 things subconsciously that they have eaten more of. And if there isn't, what we then do is then you make a food log for the next 14 days, and then conveniently, when you've explained all of these things, weight starts to move back down because they've automatically corrected the issues because they were aware more of their eating habits than they were previously. And that's why the ownership works. If you always blame it on yourself, you always blame your own intentions, you blame your own accuracies, blame your own measures, blame your own biases, you will then naturally course correct when you have that awareness, which then means that you never get stuck in starvation mode again, because you're always thinking, I can do better here, here, and here, and I'm going to continue to do that this week. So fuck starvation mode, it's a myth. And if you've lost weight previously and you're not losing weight now, what did you do then that you're not doing now, that you've stopped doing, or what have you added in, or what have you taken away in the last couple of weeks that you need to put back in that you weren't doing before? You're welcome.